welcome in another edition of Booty and Baribeau. By this time, we should not have to introduce ourselves, but we will. He's Josh Booty. I'm Rachel Baribeau. Week 6, Josh. We said it the very first time we did this podcast, and that was blink, and you'll miss this college football season. What have we learned in these first 6 weeks?
You know, there's a lot of parity. I think there's a lot of teams that can get beat and can play well enough to beat anybody in the country. I think we've got several teams that are definitely standing out. I think the biggest game up to date that's been played in our conference is the way that Florida handled Ole Miss last week at home. I think that we all knew that Florida has the ability to be a great program. They've got a lot of team speed. They've got a coach in there that really knows how to coach the offense, and they've lacked that in the last several seasons. So I think that's really been the story of the SEC so far as teams are concerned. And I know Florida's got some huge games coming up, but it's just been a wonderful 5 weeks, and you're looking good today, Rach, so I'm fired up about doing this show.
All right, I've got to ask you about the swamp magic. I'm going to call it that. Maybe Florida wouldn't be where they are today if some of these games have been played on the road. Our very own Brady Ackerman right here on Gridiron Now was talking about the comparison of Will Grier to a young Shane Matthews. And I'm curious about that comparison from a quarterback's perspective and the way you've seen him come along.
I think that's a great comparison, and I'm hoping we can get Shane on the show next week. I know the Florida showdown next week at LSU is going to be a terrific matchup, and we'll be able to showcase that game on this podcast. But I think that's a great comparison. I think, Shane Matthews had a pretty strong arm, but he was able to get outside the pocket and make some plays. He was a great leader, a tremendous player, one of the all-time greats there at Florida. The way that he was able to complete passes and always stay ahead of the down and distance, Shane Matthews always had success. It never seemed like Shane was having to try too hard with the offense. And I think Grier is trying to settle into a similar position for the Gators where he can sit back there, make the right reads. If everything falls apart, he can make good decisions. What do you do when the play's not there as a quarterback is really what makes the difference between being good and great. What do you do when the plays aren't there? When the plays are there, it's easy to execute at that level if you're accurate and you've got some arm strength. But what do you do, when the play's not there and breaks down? Do you scramble for yards? Do you throw it away? Do you take a sack? Sometimes that's the best thing to do in certain situations, and just punt the football because you've got such a great defense. So he's learning how to play the quarterback position as a redshirt freshman. He's doing a fabulous, fabulous job.
I heard somebody say the other day, they were talking about buying in, Josh, and the incredible power of buying in. I think there are a couple of things that you can't measure on a stat column, and one is momentum in a game, and the other is the ability to buy in if a team has bought in. And certainly the Florida Gators have bought in to what Coach McElwain and Jeff Collins are doing there. We know they had a great defense, but this offense has just come along and has been one of the most pleasant surprises of this young college football season.
There's no doubt about it. I think when you talk about buying in, you're talking about the strength of the character of the head coach and the staff that he's put together. I've been on staffs where there wasn't a lot of strength, and I've been on staffs like Nick Saban's where there was tons of strength and leadership at every position as far as coaching positions are concerned, and of course, him being the head man. I mean, you just felt like, we were prepared to play. We were given the chance every Saturday to go out there and win a ball game, and we weren't always going to be behind the 8 ball. And both sides of the ball played well. I think if you play on teams where maybe the offense excels but the defense is bad, then after time, after game after game after game, if you're always having to constantly score a lot of points and keep up with the opposition, then it becomes very difficult, and vice versa. So I think that leadership and that belief in a system is really what carries a program, and that's why you see great coaches like Urban Meyer go from Florida and win national championships to going directly to Ohio State and doing the same thing. He's got a recipe in his head, and he's such a great character person and leader that he can do that. And so, yeah, it's fun to watch some of these big games develop and some of these big rivalries develop over time because, Florida's been down. Now they're coming back around, and some of these games that they're playing are now nationally televised top 25 games, and that's that's the fun part of football. I know this week we've got a big one. Can Georgia, bounce back at Tennessee with Butch Jones, on the hot seat, I think, and a chance for Georgia to give Tennessee their fourth loss on the SEC East side of things. And what do you think about that matchup?
I think that Butch Jones has got his back against the wall. Also our very own Tony Barnhart, he wrote a piece early in the week. He said he visited with Butch Jones, and he's meticulous and he takes notes, and he's had a meeting with the guys, and the guys, I think Kurt Maggitt, defensive end, said, hey, listen, it is the coach's coach, but it's on us as the players to be able to execute the plays that they set out for us, and how they prepare us. We've got to go out there and execute. So I think there was something to that, that accountability of saying, hey, listen, they've done all they can. We got to go out there and do our job. So, I think it's a very interesting game. If you talk about momentum, if you talk about kind of psychological aspect going in, you got Butch Jones against the wall, and then you've got a Georgia team that just suffered a really devastating loss, and how do you get back from that? How do you their season is not out of contention by any means. It was a big game. They floundered in the game. I think Bama was better than people thought they were. They caught them at the wrong time. But I'm interested to see kind of whose character shows and which team wants it more in this matchup.
Yeah, I think it's going to boil down to Mark Richt and how he has handled the week of preparation after that devastating loss. If he can really rally his troops and get them excited to play this game, they're not out of it. They've got a great chance to bounce back. They had a game where the offense was dismal. They got so behind so fast they had to get out of their out of character for them last week, against Alabama. So it's going to be interesting to see if they can kind of get back on schedule with everything in their run game and pass game and see how it mixes. But I think, the key to the game to me, Rach, is Dobbs. And does he have the ability to complete passes and throw the ball versus a good defensive opponent? He hadn't been able to show that, especially late in games. He hasn't been able to show that he can really fire the football, and they release the offense and give him the chance to do that. And I think they've kind of held the reins in on him. So that's going to be an interesting, interesting concept to the way this game plays out. But, we've got another great game, Florida at Missouri. The chance for McElwain and that bunch to go up against a 4-1 team and go on the road and kind of establish themselves once again. I mean, what do you think that is going to happen in that game? Is Missouri going to be able to stop that Florida offense and Will Grier?
They're a good defense. Missouri's a good defense, and certainly I think Missouri, when I went to SEC Media Days and talked to Coach Pinkel, he wouldn't comment on it because he's not going to comment on it. But a couple of the players talked about the disrespect factor that they had gotten from the media, having been to Atlanta 2 years in a row and really being considered underdogs and just being disrespected in the media. And I think if there's ever a time to take on that air of disrespect, that air of, hey, listen, we've been beat up a little bit. The season hasn't gone exactly how we wanted it to. Our quarterback, unspecified team violation, whatever it may be. I mean, it's not been good for us, but here's the time we can get back on track. And here's the true test for me, Josh, is how much has that character grown of of Jim McElwain's group at Florida, that they can handle the accolades, and they can handle the pressure, and they can handle all the talk, right? Because that's kind of the test of a true champion. So I'm just really interested to see how well they handle that now that people are talking about them again in a positive sense.
It's a different animal when all eyes are on you. When you're the underdog and you can kind of surprise people with a new way of playing football or a new offense like McElwain's installed there at Florida. We all knew they played great defense. They just had zero offense in the last few years. So they have crept up on people. Now they're getting to the point where people fear Florida again, and that's an amazing thing for the university, for that program, and McElwain's got to feel good about where he's at. Their goal going into this season was probably to compete at a very high level in the SEC East with maybe an outside chance to play in a SEC championship if they had a really good season. Well, right now they're in the middle of having all that come to fruition if they can win some more of these ball games. So they're they're way ahead of schedule, and I know McElwain's very happy, and it's going to be fun to watch them this week.
On that Georgia matchup, that Georgia Tennessee, I wanted to add this to what you were saying. When we talked to David Green earlier in the week, Josh, and you mentioned it, I mentioned it on Monday, was the everybody always puts it on the quarterback. I think Richard Todd was one of the famous people to say it at Alabama when you're winning, the quarterback gets too much praise, and when you're losing, they get far too much criticism, right? Eli Gold wrote about that in his book. Everybody put it on Grayson Lambert, but those receivers weren't open. So I'm interested to see, was it the rain? Do they pay extra attention to that this week, to running routes, to getting open, to getting separation? Because I was talking to former Georgia Bulldog DJ Jones about it, one of my mentors and the first person I did radio with, and he was, at halftime, he was like, look, it's on the receivers. Yes, Grayson's not getting protection. Bryce's not getting protection. They've turned over the ball. There's rain out there. So I'm interested to see from that perspective of the game, if you see crisper routes, more separation, and just more oomph in that part of the game.
Yeah, as we were watching the game last week in Athens, you could notice, and I think it's a lot of all that. I think Saban does a wonderful job at Alabama coaching the secondary. So he's got great players at every position in the defensive secondary, and that puts a real bind on the receivers. If you can cover guys downfield, but Georgia also had a lot of third down and long situations because they weren't able to establish the run in the first half of Nick Chubb. They were having to try to do some things down the field in the rain. Now you're talking about the time that it takes to either play action or throw downfield passes against Alabama with that pass rush in third and long situation doesn't bode well for any. There's no team that it bodes well for, much less against an Alabama defense with a Saban coach secondary. So you have to look at the positions that they put themselves in to get to have those long yardage down and distance situations, and then you have to look at and give credit to Nick Saban and that Alabama secondary, maybe the best in the conference. But it is going to be interesting to see how Georgia rebounds back. But they've got to get ahead of schedule on offense in the run game, and that's going to allow Lambert and the offense and maybe some of these receivers to get their butt going.
You mentioned Nick Saban. He had an interesting week. I covered him for 2 years at Alabama, so I was the recipient of a lot
Lucky
of
you.
I know, right? Actually, funny enough, I say this to people. He made me a better reporter because when I went in there was never a time that I wasn't on my P's and Q's. There was never a time that I didn't have all my T's, crossed and I's dotted, because he expects greatness, and he doesn't set out to make you look like a fool, but he expects greatness from the people that cover him, from the beat reporters, and poor people that come in there from a national perspective and don't know kind of his buzzwords and the things that set him off. But he expects greatness from his staff, from his players, and from those people around him. And so he made me a better reporter. But he was on it this week, Josh. You played for him, and he let a reporter know and kind of gave him the business about burying Alabama and expectations. But then he went on in his radio show this week to talk about fans and expectations and not getting the big head and not overlooking Arkansas because, so I've heard one person say that Arkansas got their mojo back versus Tennessee. I don't know if necessarily they have it back because I don't know they ever found their identity. I think they went away from it early in the season. But you certainly can't overlook Arkansas if you're Alabama because it's a dangerous game and it's going to be a physical game, certainly at the line of scrimmage.
Yeah, I think Saban's just trying to make a point to everybody, the media, the fans. Hey, this isn't easy, guys. We work very, very hard week in, week out to be the favorite, to be a team that can be reckoned with. He does such a great job in recruiting. Even the offseason is very, very crucial for him and for that program. So he's just trying to make a statement. Hey, yeah, he'll make you look like a fool if you ask something stupid, but at the same time, he is very serious about what he does. We all know that, and that's why he wins championships. But he is facing a good Arkansas team, a team that can run and throw. They've got the biggest offensive line in college football. They've got a great tailback in Alex Collins, who's had 3 consecutive 150-yard games. So they're a team that can move the football. Their quarterback, Allen, has completed a lot of balls and thrown for a lot of yards. And so it's just another great test for Alabama. They have them at home. That's a huge plus for Bama. It's hard to win at Bryant-Denny, but Ole Miss did it several weeks ago when they were underdogs. And so every game's important. I think that Saban's just trying to stress the importance of every game they play. You have to line up and play your best, or you can get beaten. Everybody's gunning for the Alabamas of the world.
So you talked about Arkansas's offense, and I mentioned earlier in the season kind of getting away from that, particularly in that Toledo game. Do you think it was a turning point in the Tennessee game, in the A&M game, where they found that that physical presence that they wanted and that they said they were going to have with the big hogs on the offensive line and the running backs? And do you think Allen is settled in at quarterback? Because early in the season, that wasn't so apparent.
Yeah, I think they've settled in at the quarterback position. Allen settled in. I think
Yeah.
their tailback is one of the top tailbacks in the country, and so I think that their identity has developed. I think that they've played well the last several weeks out on offense, and showing that Collins has run for 150 yards in the last 3 games is a huge boost to their identity on offense. So, that's what we're going to see. We're going to see a big dose of Alex Collins unless Alabama just completely stuffs them as a team. But Arkansas, again, has the largest offensive line, maybe the strongest offensive line in all of college football. So to see that matchup with those guys in the trenches in Alabama's front seven versus those five hogs for Arkansas is going to be a fun one.
All right, Josh. So I've been raised around men, worked with men for 10 years, raised around sports fans, two big brothers that played sports. And so this matchup for me is like particularly intriguing because the old saying is you're just going to line up and knock your bleep in the dirt, right? Like who's going to knock each other off the ball? And so I'm so excited. I'm a fan of old school football. We were talking about this last night and prepping for this show. So I am particularly excited to watch the matchup in the trenches between that front seven and that offensive line of Arkansas. One of the best, and it's going to be a battle up there.
You've always loved the trench play. I've heard you say it a lot. You appreciate the game of football,
Yeah.
and you appreciate the hard work that those guys up front, and they make a big difference. I'm telling you, if you don't win the line of scrimmage and you don't win it in the trenches, then you've really got no chance in this game. So it's such a big part of football that a lot of glitz and glamour doesn't go their direction, but it's certainly a big part of it. And I know something that kind of was on your mind and heart this week because you've got friends in South Carolina was what's happening there with the weather and the developments there in South Carolina, them having to move the LSU game where they were going to be able to host them in Columbia to Baton Rouge. What do you think about what's gone on this week with the people in South Carolina, Spurrier, and the staff moving the game to Baton Rouge?
Well, first of all, I think having survived the tornado April 27, 2011 in Tuscaloosa, and it was the second worst tornadic outbreak in the history of the United States, all across the Southeast, almost 300 people lost, and having the chance, and I say this with complete conviction, I've covered national championships, NASCAR races, Super Bowls, and the opportunity to be there and rebuild in the months and the days afterwards. And I was getting ready to go to work for Fox Sports, and they said, take another couple of weeks before you come to work for us so you can ride the Red Cross truck and you can go out there. And I was a Zumba teacher at the time. We went to the shelter and just taught Zumba, and this guy comes up, Josh, and he hugs me and he said, "This is the first time that I've smiled since the storm." And so I get it. I get what these people are going through, and one of my agents is there in South Carolina. 17 people as of yesterday lost. More water coming, and they don't get it because there's sun shining right now, and they don't understand there's more water coming, so more evacuations. With all that said, I think it's amazing what LSU is doing. They have seen LSU and LSU fans, as you well know, have seen people's goodwill and good tidings around them, around Katrina, and I think that they just paid that forward. I know that the LSU band has learned South Carolina's alma mater and their fight song. There's been like signs going up around the city saying, go GEAUX, Gamecocks, welcome. I mean, I just think it's super cool with all the negative stuff that we see in college football and the stuff we have to cover, Josh. It's really cool to see something like this.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that one band is going to sing the other band or
Right?
play the other band's fight song. But I think if it was Alabama coming to LSU, LSU wouldn't be doing all this. It's that South Carolina is not on their side of the conference. But I think what LSU and what the people of Baton Rouge and South Louisiana had to deal with Katrina 10 years ago, they know the severity of something like this, and I think that's why they've made the decision to do all that and to cooperate and make it all work because they want to play football and they want to bring a great football game to the people this week and even to the people back home in South Carolina. So it's fun and it's going to be fun to watch Spurrier on the sidelines at Tiger Stadium. It's always fun having him in town.
He'll be eating grass. Leonard Fournette will be running over people. We know that, and I know next week on Monday, I want to jump into a couple of things on Monday with you about Brandon Harris after we watch him this weekend. Eventually there's going to be a time when he has to throw more. I want to talk about him. I also want to talk to you about finishing. You and I have been discussing this off the podcast for a couple of weeks, the art of finishing, and what does that look like. But Josh, tell me, you've had an extensive playing career, both as a professional and as an amateur. If you think about the best memory of sportsmanship that you remember, what's that for you?
I just think over the years, watching coaches handle situations that are not what they thought was going to happen after, outcomes of games and watch them as they, coaches at the end of games, they have to go and meet and visit. And I've seen some instances where Pete Carroll and Harbaugh after a Stanford SC game or even in the pros at Seattle and San Francisco, they didn't like each other, and I've seen some mix-ups. We've seen some pretty amazing, performances by coaches where they didn't have sportsmanship, and then we've seen some we see stuff every week where coaches come together and they respect one another. And I think that's the biggest part of football is, you want to beat their butt, but you also respect the work that they put into it. And there's going to be people on that staff that you lost to or you beat that are going to be coaching for you next year or the following year. The coaching world is just a huge cluster, and it's a lot of moving parts. So there's a lot of guys at Georgia last week, there were 5 assistant coaches that were on Saban's staff. So those guys come and go and come back around. And so you really have to be respectful of the hard work that everybody puts in the game of football. And that's why I'm not a football coach, is because their hours are so crazy. They've got no life. They've got no family life. And the sacrifices that those guys make, I think, are noticed by the other coaches. They know people are working hard in this business to keep their job. And I think that's where the sportsmanship at that level comes into play.
But I'm going to out you. You are a football coach, right? Just at a lower level. Correct?
Yeah, I do it for fun at the high school and junior high here because I have a nephew that's a great quarterback in 8th grade, and my brother's a high school football coach out here at Sage High School on the West Coast in Newport Beach. So I'm a volunteer, but I don't want any part of Saban's schedule. I don't want any part of it.
You mentioned the coaches, and I'll say this in closing. My closing thoughts for our Friday podcast of Week 6. You talked about great coaches and the coaching tree. McElwain, I think and he'll tell you this. I talked to Jimbo Fisher a long time ago. Actually, it was Will Muschamp at the national championship between Texas and Alabama, and I asked him, tell me about your coaching tree. Like, how does that work? And he said, Rachel, it's kind of like going through a lunch line. And he said, you take an orange from this guy, and you take a vegetable from this guy, and you take a mystery meat from this guy, and then you have a dessert from this guy, and so it all kind of comes together, and they make you who they are. And Jim McElwain has said it, the success that he has had, part of the success he owes to Nick Saban and working with him, and that honed in myopic feel of, just being able to laser focus. He gets that from Nick Saban, and I think that's a big reason for the success he's having.
Yeah, I think, and if you look too at teams that create dynasties like a Saban or a Pete Carroll or some of these coaches that have done just wonderful jobs in the university for a long period of time, for a decade or so. It's so hard to do that because your assistants are going to get offered head coaching jobs at other places, and they're going to jump ship and go be their own guy and take what you gave them as a head coach and go try to implement that at another university. And so it's very hard for teams to stay good over the years, and that's why you see them riding riding that wave is because they're losing assistants all the time, and if you're any good, you're going to lose assistants, and they're going to go get paid a lot more money to be a head coach. So to have a program stay at the highest level like some of these do, that's a huge reward for the coach to be able to assemble that team year in, year out, and win ball games year in, year out.
All right, final thoughts for you, Josh Booty, as we embark on week 6 of this amazing Christmas, Hanukkah, birthday, New Year's, all wrapped up time of year for us.
It's a fun time of year. The holidays aren't that far around. I think this week the biggest game on my list is Florida going to Missouri. If they can stay undefeated, because they've got such a big game next week at LSU and at Tiger Stadium, where both teams are going to come in there undefeated if Florida can win this matchup. So I'm really paying a lot of attention to that game. I think if Florida can knock off Missouri, which I think they will, then we're going to have a wonderful week next week. And then if Alabama can do the same against Arkansas, then it sets up a Alabama at Texas A&M matchup where A&M's undefeated as well. And I think that's going to be next week is going to be a wonderful week of football. But don't miss this Saturday because there's some great games.
All right, Josh Booty, thanks so much as always.